Hi, I'm Nikki, the Obsessive Bookseller. Welcome to this episode of Project Sci-Fi. I have been curating a list of all of the sci-fi books that I want to read. It's quite lengthy at this point, and it is now time to pick another book. And the thing is there are so many books on here that I would really like to read that I thought I would get my patrons involved to help me pick out a title. So I've narrowed it down to three. I want them to choose between Ender's Game, which it'll actually be a third time read for me because I want to finally continue the series this time. The next one I want them to pick between is Foundation by Isaac Asimov. Yes, it has been a long time coming. I have not read this series yet. Definitely a classic sci-fi staple. And then finally, The Forever War by Joe Haldeman. I think this is a military sci-fi. It promises a lot of action, excitement, moving pieces, great characters. All of that stuff is what I'm hoping to get out of this book, so we will see which one wins. Honestly, I don't think they can pick a bad book here. But my patrons picked Forever War by Joe Haldeman for me to read, and so far this one's going really well. Now, there are a few things about it that I would say would be problematic, and I knew that going in that it had some problems, things that are not socially acceptable, but I decided to read it anyway. Not overlooking it, but acknowledging that if I want to read the story and see what kind of innovative, creative world building he has going on, that I'd have to put up with that stuff as well. So putting up with that stuff, I'm really liking the pace of the story. It's very fast paced, very military focused. If anything, I would say if you were to describe the story in like one sentence, it would be creative ways to keep your comrades alive. That's mostly what I'm getting out of the book so far. I'm about halfway through, and I like a lot of the ideas. The combat scenes have been really interesting and fun, and the cheekiness of the main character, he could be a little bit funnier if he wanted to be. I think I'm too used to John Scalzi books, which the one this is reminding me most of is Old Man's War. So if you take that story and just like make it a little less funny, then you've kind of got the Forever War. But for when this one was written, I'm at the point now where he's talking about like how the world has changed and how we have adapted with overpopulation and things like that, and just the interesting ideas he has in here on like how jobs are distributed and handled and like the black market for jobs, and a lot of really cool ideas and concepts. I am surprised at how quickly I am reading this book. It is not a very long book at all, and I am interested enough now that I might continue on afterwards depending on how things go. But I can see why this one is a staple in the sci-fi genre. I'm glad I got around to reading it. It clips along like really fast, and not so fast that you feel like you're missing things, but just fast enough that you feel the intensity of the action. So if you can set aside the problematic things, this is actually not a bad place to start if you're trying to get into classic sci-fi, from my opinion. It seems like more accessible than a lot of the other things that I've tried. Like, don't start with Hyperion. Just don't do it. Unless you want to be incredibly uncomfortable. This one's going well, and I can't wait to get to the end of it and see what I think of the thing as a whole. So I decided, for the sake of completing series and not starting new things until I wrap up everything I've already got going, I picked up Children of Ruin by Adrian Tchaikovsky. And this one's not quite as enjoyable for me as the first book. There's something about the pacing and the jumping back and forth of the narration that has me either wildly engaged or completely disconnected. There are whole passages where I would like listen to the book before bed, right? And set a 15-minute timer. And then the next morning would do what I usually do, is rewind until the last place that I remembered. But with this case, I would rewind past the 15 minutes and back into stuff that I had experienced the day before, which means I was not absorbing the story at all, even when I was not trying to fall asleep. And I think the problem is he's taking a lot of time to kind of just explain about the characters we met in the first book, and kind of giving a backstory on why they behave the way they do, and kind of giving context for the current situation. But the problem is the current situation, not a lot is happening. I'm at about the 60% mark, and it's finally starting to get going. And there's a past timeline kind of bouncing back and forth between then and now. And it's cool to see how it comes together, and I really am enjoying the past perspectives, and I absolutely love the biology going on in this book so far. That is probably the thing that is continuing to keep me reading, even when sometimes I'm feeling a little bit at arm's distance, because it's just so cool. The world building. Mwah. So yeah, for just as a check-in, I'm not sad that I'm reading it. I'm enjoying it overall, but it has taken me quite a few days to get through, more so than it probably would have had I been enjoying it more, but it just hasn't been a priority to pick up. So I'm holding this to a high standard against the first book. I knew I wasn't going to like it as much, but I didn't think I would be as disconnected as I feel from this one. We're probably sitting at about a 3-star right now, but we'll have to see how it wraps up because, like I said, I'm at the 60% mark and things are starting to come together. Things are advancing. There's a lot more action, so perhaps I will end on a higher note. Stay tuned. So there was a point at about the 80% mark where I considered seriously a DNF. I was just so disengaged with the characters and everything going on, and I just didn't care anymore. But I don't know, I threatened a DNF for a couple of days, and then I realized that I probably want to pick up Children of Memory at some point, because I do really love this author for a lot of different things. So I pushed through to the end. I don't think I got anything extra out of it. I listened to it on like triple speed or whatever to get there. Maybe not quite that fast, but yeah. So this one, all the things I mentioned that I liked about it, I still like, but at the end of the day, it was kind of a bust. So I think I'm still giving it a 3-star just for concept, but yeah, that was a rough one. So I finished Forever War, and I didn't like it nearly as much as I thought I would. Now, I went into it knowing that it was problematic, and it definitely had some issues that might touch on some very politically incorrect things. But I did go into it knowing that those would be present and deciding to read it anyway. There were things I liked about this one. What threw me off was, I think, a little bit of different expectations than what I actually got. For me, the title Forever War evokes this like heavily military-focused novel with a ton of battle scenes, a lot of strategy, a lot of like inter-unit politics. And that's what we got for about the first third of the book. And then it launched off into a completely different thing where he became a civilian for a little while between events of the war. And almost 50% of the book right in the middle focused on just that. And I did not care for anything that we got in that. There was a little bit of interesting ideas where he talked about what life was like in the future or whatever and how he had to adapt to the change, but this is where a lot of the problematic things came into play. But I just found it not interesting. Like, none of this stuff is what I signed up for the story for. There was a lot more interpersonal connections than I thought there would be when going into this book, so that was a plus. But yeah, by the time we finally got back to the war stuff, there wasn't enough time left for any substance whatsoever. I wanted more of a focus on the alien race that we're fighting. Basically, I got about 10% effort on that compared to where I wanted it to be. I wanted a lot more strategy in how they're fighting the war, and I swear there's like nothing in there on that. Training sequences, there was a couple of segments, like couple scenes at the very beginning that focused on that, but basically that was like 5% of where I wanted it to be. And overall focus on the war, that was at about maybe 30%. So yeah, all of these expectations on what I hoped it would be because of other things that I've read that I've liked a little bit more, it just fell a little flat. I'm still glad I read it because I feel like it was one of the first movers inspiring some authors that I really love to this day. I can definitely see inspiration in John Scalzi's work, especially his Old Man's War. So if you take the things I liked about Forever War but like enhance those and make them a little bit funnier, you have Old Man's War, which one of my favorites. If you take the basic tone of the writing and then make it a lot more sophisticated and a lot more awesome politics, a great mystery, and a better through line of the story, you have Planetside, which is my all-time favorite sci-fi novel. This one was a little bit of a miss, but I'm still glad that I read it, just slowly filling in the void of all the classic fantasy books that I'd like to get around to. So anyway, now I get to choose the next book. I let my patrons pick this one, and I think this time around I am going to kind of combine projects. So my Read Burn Hoard project in March, I had a shelf with a whole bunch of sci-fi options on it, and I ended up not picking a sci-fi book because I figured I could do that for this project. So let me grab those titles. So on that shelf there's a lot of C authors, one of which is C.J. Cherryh, who wrote the Foreigner series, which is still going. And every time I see a cover for this one, I think I really want to get into this one and read more of it. But I read Foreigner and just, I did not like it. First of all, the book started like 3 different times. When you kind of finally got acclimated, it would switch and then you'd start something else and then it'd switch and then you'd finally get into the story. And then the story with this main character, this human, he was always on the periphery of all the action. And so you'd find out about it secondhand and he's just like, oh, okay, whatever. And he was more concerned about where his mail parcels were than any of the politics or anything going on in this world. Now, the companion, the side character, I thought she was really fascinating. I got so fed up with the first book and just was so over it by the time I hit the end that I think I stopped reading with like 50 pages to go. But the thing is this is a series I've always wanted to get into, and I love the covers, I love the appeal of the whole thing, I really love the potential for a lot of politicking and creative world building with non-human creatures. So I want to continue the series. I don't think I'm going to go back and see how Foreigner ended, but what I would like to do is pick up the second book and at least see if it improves from there. If it improves, then yay, I have a whole bunch of them on my shelves. If it doesn't improve, then whatever, I have a lot to donate. But I'd like to give it one more go. Maybe it was just a first book syndrome where it just needed to get its feet under it before it could launch off into the really good stuff. We shall see. So yes, I would like to read this one for Project Sci-Fi. And then Ender's Game, I've already read this book twice, but I would like to continue on into other works, but I don't really want to pick up Ender's Shadow until I've reread this one because I remember the boy who is going to be the Shadow in the next book, but I don't remember anything about him or how he interacted with the story. I could probably just watch the movie because I thought the adaptation was really good, but I just read the book again. It was really fun. Now, I have long debated on whether or not to continue with the initial books that were essentially sequels, like Children of the Mind and Xenocide, but it took the one aspect of this book that I liked the least and expanded on it in continuation, so I never read on. But Red Fury Books had a really good video about his experience with the series over the course of 1 year, and he recommended a reading order, and I'm going to follow that because what he said about it was in line with my thoughts, initial gut instincts on what I wanted to pick up and what I didn't anyway. So his suggestion is to read Ender's Game and then just to do the Shadow stuff and then forget everything else. That's my plan for this project. So for at least this episode of Project Sci-Fi, I want to pick up Ender's Game and then everything else, we shall see what I do next, but I definitely want to continue with at least Ender's Shadow within a reasonable time frame. And I'm looking forward to it. This looks like it's going to be what I pick up for the rest of the project. If I do anything else sci-fi in the meantime, I'll include that in here, may as well. But I like my reading plans. I really like that this particular project is forcing me to pick up books a little bit sooner than I would have otherwise and kind of broadening the type of things that I'm reading. So I will check in when I've got any kind of progress on which one I pick up next. Hi, quick Project Sci-Fi update. So I have begun my third foray into Ender's Game with the intention of continuing on in the series at some point. And I forget how well written the beginning of this book is. It's kind of visceral and you really feel the plight of the characters straight out of the gate. And I love, now that I've read the whole book, knowing where they're going with the story, seeing all the indications at the beginning of what's really going on here. It's really cool. So gonna see how far I can get into this one. It's a relatively short book, all things considered. And yeah, just enjoy my experience with it and hopefully continue on. As you know, I've been reading Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. I made it to about the 25% mark. I love the pacing, I love the characters. There's an element of competition, which I think is so cool. And it's one of the few where I think the movie adaptation did it justice. There's one aspect in here that I really didn't care for at all, and they managed to fix that in the movie and keep everything else that I thought was awesome and represent that one part in a better light. Overall, really strong read for me. I still plan to continue it, and then I'm going to read the Shadow series, at least Ender's Shadow, and go from there. Possibly for another sci-fi project. Hi, Nikki here with the final Project Sci-Fi update. So I have finished Ender's Game, and just, what can I say? This is my third read through, but even this time around, it still struck me how incredibly, exceptionally written this book is. And I did the full cast audio version, and at the end there's a postscript from the author describing his process of getting this story published and everything from like the original ideas that he had to eventually getting it turned into a film. I found the entire process fascinating, but what stood out the most is that he mentioned that the book came out in 1985. Like, folks, I was born in 1986, and it is just incredible to me that this book has managed to stand the test of time. Like, reading it, I would not have been able to tell you when it was written. I actually thought it was, like, after 2000. Nothing about the technology or the situations these kids find themselves in feels dated at all. I really love the training sequences in this book. That was kind of, like, the crux of the story for the author, and you can tell he treated it really well, and I love the evolution of skills. I love it when characters learn how to do something and enhance their skills in books, and then getting to see that training put into action. That kind of level of competition is what turns books into auto reads for me, and I thought it was handled so well. For me, historically, it was all about those training sequences, and I think this is the first time reading through that I didn't mind the other elements, like the element with the brother and sister, the element with the fantasy game, and the aliens themselves. All of that stuff, I feel like because I've read more science fiction this time around, I was more prepared to kind of absorb. And to the point where I'm actually quite interested in reading more in the series. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, I'm glad to have experienced this one again. I am astounded at how well it has stood to the test of time. And I wish I could be recommending it more. I haven't done any research on what the author has actually been saying or doing. I've just kind of heard hearsay. And I wish I could be like fully endorsing this, like go out and buy it and read it. But I support the LGBTQ plus community, and it would feel really icky to read this book if I had been personally affected by some of the things that he said. And there's a whole bunch of that surrounding J.K. Rowling, and I'm really not quite sure how to like reconcile in my brain really good works of art versus the creators and their individual opinions. And like I said before, I'm deciding to read this stuff anyway, knowing that there's a lot of baggage that goes along with it, knowing that a lot of old sci-fi has this sexist and racist and prejudiced stuff in it, because I want to know more about where the genre came from and see a lot of the inspirations to the works that I'm currently loving that are being written today. And I can only take them in small doses. Now, I didn't see a lot of that in the text itself. I'm sure that if you were hyper aware, you may have found some things in there, but I was just all absorbed with the situation Ender was faced with and all of those really cool training sequences. I didn't pick up on anything beyond that, but I was not hunting for it either. Anyway, it's a shame when you have to like qualify what you're reading because the author has been behaving badly, but whatever. As a work of art, I really love this one. And that's it for Project Sci-Fi this time around. Now, I have a clip that is being included in here from back in October, and it is almost May. So these projects that I'm doing are taking like so much time to film because I only have so much time to read the science fiction books. So what I think I'm going to do going forward is like maybe make it a shorter version, like publish something whenever I've read one book instead of waiting until I've read 2 or 3 books. Like, it's more satisfying to read 2 or 3 books for an entire vlog, but if it takes 6 months to get it out, then it's really not a project worth my time, if that makes sense. And then there's the stress of like, oh, I need to be reading more so I can publish this video so that I can finally delete it off my phone and create space, whatever. The organizational part of me is balking at the entire process so far. Next time I'm going to try presenting just a couple of titles and then having my patrons vote on it, at least for Project Sci-Fi. And then I will present my vlog for just that one book. And honestly, I think that way I'll be able to read more books than if I keep trying to do what I'm doing now. It's not working. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me on this particular adventure of Project Sci-Fi, and I hope to catch you on the next one. Bye.